area of broadband data and the power that having an accurate picture of what's happening across Southern Ontario will enable us to do. It's not just to explain to colleagues from Northern Canada or even Northern Ontario about what's happening down here with broadband and to overcome this myth that, oh, you're well populated, you must be well served with broadband. That's why the rest of us are not getting broadband in Canada because you guys are all complacent. Well, I talk back and I say, well, wait a minute, you need to actually look at what's happening here. Let's look at the correlation between population growth or population and broadband access. And so this map basically puts us together with Census Stats Canada data, looking at areas of low broadband and low population density at one end of the scale, that's the bright blue, pale blue, right to the dark green, which is high broadband access and high population density. One of the interesting things, and keep in mind that this is constantly changing because of the gap effect, because service in ISP service providers come up and then collapse. We know that with Everest and ExploreNet, for instance, that this is a very dynamic picture. It's changing all the time. But at the same time, we can see some areas of Southern Ontario where that argument that there's not sufficient demand for broadband doesn't work. So there are areas where there is sufficient demand, but there are other reasons why that capacity is not met. Another thing that this map shows is the urban shadow effect of larger metropolitan areas on the rural areas around them. And again, this is important in terms of being able to say, can we create hubs of connectivity where there is a potential for an urban shadow effect, both in terms of the actual technology, but also in terms of creating businesses that will go the last mile to the farm and to household internet access. In my paper, I talk a bit about some of the examples that I'm encouraged by across the province that 5 years ago did not exist. And so one of them has been Guelph has been very fortunate in the past few years to be able to collaborate with Digital Ontario, with the Ministry of Government Services, and now with OMAFRA on encouraging more discussion around how broadband is influencing agricultural entrepreneurship. And there's a profile from Hawk Hill Farm in Eastern Ontario that's on the OMAFRA, I think it's on the OMAFRA site as well as the Digital Ontario site. So please have a look at that if you want to see some actual entrepreneurs who use broadband to widen their businesses. Interesting, it's from Eastern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, but the stories are there. One of the stories that I can feature is for me, a very interesting example, because in Grey Bruce, with FoodLink Grey Bruce, they've come up with a new model of being able to bring access to the farm gate. They've created a virtual farm gate as an association, enabling members in their association to have websites, web pages about everything from specialty mushrooms to food foraging. That's when you go out on a weekend and you forage your own food, maybe wild grapes, and learn how to turn them into grape jelly. To featuring local restaurants and other businesses. And so what you have is an infomediary providing that virtual farm gate, because many of their members actually have no internet access whatsoever. And so you have opportunities like this to build connections when they don't exist. Another one that's emerging that is very youth-driven are e-cottage industries. E-cottage is a concept that comes from Eastern Europe originally, around telecottages or outsourced rural businesses that are creating physical or digital products. Well, the same thing's happening here across Ontario. The rebounders, these are people who have some means to return to rural Ontario to live, are starting e-cottage industries where they will create and market and distribute their product through online stores, everything from Kijiji to iTunes. So this is very relevant to the creative economy to take account of some of these types of innovations. And then finally, we need to look to institutional innovations, everything from m-banking or banking online, but it's not just banking online, it's moving money, moving investment through mobile means, to distance education, distance learning opportunities. And again, these two types of activities are very important to the creative economy in Ontario, and taking account of them will be important. In the paper, I've made 4 chief recommendations and conclusions. Each of these are informing further research that we're involved with to look at and investigate this gap effect, to not turn a blind eye to the quality of service issue in rural Canada, and especially in rural southwestern Ontario and generally across the province, that we need to recognize and communicate the link between entrepreneurship and rural broadband much more. I think OMAFRA and other agencies that are giving awards and prizes for entrepreneurship in food and agriculture are very conscious of this, and I'm encouraging that type of work to happen at the municipal level and county level. Mapping data management generally, it's a top priority, and we have to overcome, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, this reluctance to share information because it privileges others. If we don't have the information, we don't have the data, and we don't work with it, we only have an incomplete picture of what's happening. We have only hearsay. And then finally, a business case. We need a business case for the household use of rural broadband. We often get a business case in the creative economy for the business case, or business rather. So we need a business case for the household use of rural broadband. Why? Because many of the factors that you talked about, Internet and ICTs in today's world are part of our lived and individual social reality. We are, as Marshall McLuhan once said, having technology as an extension of ourselves. And we need to have the business case for linking right to the household level, because if the household's not happy, I can tell you the businesses are not happy. And if the businesses aren't happy, they're not going to be there in the rural areas. So a little bit more emphasis on that business case for household use of broadband would be helpful across Canada. And overcoming some of the myths and preoccupations with that last mile of wire are also needed. This week on Tuesday, there was a spread in the Globe and Mail on rural broadband. I don't know how many of you were able to read that. But it came at a time when CRTC has just had a set of very important hearings around using its regulatory power to ensure that the telecoms will provide last mile service in rural and remote parts of Canada. So on this last slide, you have comments from Michael Hennessy from TELUS about extending that wire line and reaching rural communities with internet. Who's going to pay for it? It's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, 700 or so of those millions of dollars, according to CRTC. So huge money here. But at the same time, I think the comment from Tony Clement, Industry Minister, is relevant. You know, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for the next generation of satellites to make a difference in rural Canada? I don't think so, because if the history to date is any indicator, even if the new technologies come online, it'll be the last of the rural community, or rural communities will be among the last who actually receive that service. So we have to have a dialogue with the regulator, and we have to make our own decisions as rural communities about where we're going to go in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. We have about 7 minutes for questions with respect to rural broadband and the creative economy.
Have you also included as part of your research the work that's been going on in Eastern Ontario with the Warden's Office project? And also, I want to say that this is extremely important for one of the areas where I'm working, and that you mentioned mapping data on broadband service. There's a huge need to have a very complex and updated inventory of the forest resources of Eastern Ontario. It will be a huge help when that is in place. There are a lot of very, very large files that will need to be flowing about.
Yeah, that's a really good example. The last example you have of this not achieving the minimum target of 1.5 megabits per second, going more, going further to a higher bandwidth because of the needs of agriculture and natural resources to work with large files and to also increase community engagement with those data sets so that they also provide ground truthing of what is in it. And that has to be done through things like video conferencing and voice over internet that has no or minimal cost associated with it. So the applications also need to be suited to rural areas. Also, another thing is that we know from digital literacy and also looking at that area, that rural communities, rural users of data sets also need to have good user-friendly interfaces. So, I mean, they're not going to approach it the way a university professor would, a data set. They will need other ends to that data set that are appropriate to someone who perhaps didn't finish high school, or maybe they did, but and also a language interface as well, English, French, etc. So these are implying that we need good bandwidths, good speeds on the internet we have access to. The earlier part of your question, are we aware of what's happening in Eastern Ontario? Yes, and we're highly jealous of it in Southwestern Ontario. And although, I mean, Essex was talked about earlier on, there's been some important early innovators, but my interactions with the municipalities and counties in Southwestern Ontario, and when I look at data from areas like Niagara Peninsula, for instance, it's almost like it's a sense of, you know, how do we learn from Eastern Ontario, but also how do we team up to be able to all of us benefit in this process of building next generation connectivity for rural Canada.
At the back, please.
Yeah. Just that question, who is going to pay for it, that TELUS is saying? Obviously there's a need and a demand and a want of this, but who is going to pay? The government, can they actually subsidize this? Obviously the TELUS's of the world aren't going to. There are businesses. So what is the answer to that question?
That's the million, that's the trillion, zillion dollar question. You know, I'll give you back a question, which is, can people wait for this to be sorted out? And some of our experience is that no, they're not going to wait. They're going to figure it out and try to do what they can themselves, because the telecoms will, if they are regulated, and CRTC says, listen, a portion of your profits are going to go to the last mile projects, that's one thing, but that'll take a while. And I learn a lot from our First Nations of Northwestern Ontario. They have already gone through that discussion a long time ago when they were seeking connectivity because their youth were leaving, or because the residential school system had collapsed, and they had said no more to off territory education. They wanted to go to an internet high school type of program, which is now provincially accredited. They just did it. They did it as a communities. And they also went to the federal government, and they went to whoever would listen to them and said, you know, we have a community who has this demand, and we want to move it to the next level. So I learned a lot from them that you don't wait for it to be built. You build it, and if there's problems with building it, you learn from those problems. You take it into the next piece of work. The Prince Edward County experience of the creative economy really strikes me as that kind of an attitude, which is you just give it your best try, and you learn as you go along, and you make it better. And I think that's the same case with broadband in communities across Southern Ontario. You just get going on it, and you do as much as you possibly can. But at the same time, we need all those of government, the feds, province, locally, to get on board with rural broadband as an essential and universal service.
Final question.
Maybe the people from Nova Scotia could answer, but wasn't there